December 22nd, 1944, 2:30 in the afternoon, 5th Panzer Army Headquarters, Luxembourg. General Major Hasso von Manteuffel stared at the Ardennes map, where red arrows showed his tanks advancing toward the Meuse River. 6 days ago, Operation Watch on Rhine had begun triumphantly, with Americans fleeing in panic, abandoning equipment like frightened children. The sound of German tank engines had echoed through frozen valleys as Panzer Grenadiers advanced against crumbling American positions. But now his adjutant reported something impossible. "Herr General, American Third Army is turning north. Patton is coming." Manteuffel almost laughed, because you cannot turn an army of 300,000 men in 2 days. This violated every principle of military science he had learned in 25 years of warfare. Yet somewhere in those snow-covered hills, American columns were already moving, their engines creating a mechanical thunder that announced something German intelligence had never imagined could exist. The very idea seemed absurd. Entire armies required weeks to redeploy, not hours. But American radio traffic suggested otherwise, and that impossibility would soon become Germany's nightmare. Manteuffel dismissed the reports as enemy disinformation, because accepting their truth meant accepting that everything Wehrmacht leadership believed about American military capability was fundamentally wrong. The general returned to studying his maps, confident that within 72 hours, his panzers would reach Antwerp and split the Allied front forever. He could not know that at that very moment, American tank columns were already beginning the greatest tactical maneuver in military history. The German offensive in the Ardennes was built upon absolute confidence in American military inferiority that had become sacred doctrine within Wehrmacht circles. Intelligence reports consistently described green divisions defending this quiet sector, while Nazi propaganda insisted Americans were merely an army of shopkeepers, incapable of serious winter combat operations. Hitler personally had convinced his generals during multiple briefings that Americans fought only in favorable weather conditions and with overwhelming material superiority, becoming helpless as children when faced with harsh winter conditions and determined German resistance. Joseph Goebbels had spent months reinforcing this narrative through radio broadcasts that reached German troops, describing Americans as soft, undisciplined civilians who collapsed under pressure from professional German soldiers. Manteuffel himself, despite extensive Eastern Front experience against Soviet forces, had been persuaded to believe in the ease of breaking through what German command considered the weakest link in Allied defensive positions. The Führer had promised that splitting the Allied front would force separate peace negotiations with Britain and America, allowing Germany to concentrate all remaining forces against the Soviet Union. German commanders saw the Ardennes as their final opportunity to demonstrate that Germanic military superiority could overcome Allied material abundance through tactical brilliance and warrior spirit that industrial production could never replace. Wehrmacht officers genuinely believed that American forces, composed primarily of conscripts rather than professional soldiers, would crumble when faced with elite German formations attacking in winter conditions that favored defenders familiar with European warfare. December 19th in Verdun witnessed an emergency meeting of Allied commanders that would systematically destroy every German assumption about American military capabilities and command structure. The simple fact that Americans could assemble all army commanders from across Western Europe within 24 hours already demonstrated reaction speed that German staff officers had never witnessed in their own military system. Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower opened the meeting by stating the crisis plainly. German forces had achieved tactical surprise and were advancing rapidly toward strategic objectives, threatening to split Allied armies and capture vital supply ports. When Eisenhower asked Third Army Commander George Patton how quickly his forces could disengage from current operations and attack the German southern flank, the response stunned everyone present. Patton replied without hesitation, his voice carrying absolute confidence that made British generals exchange skeptical glances. Montgomery himself thought this was typical American boasting, but Patton was already issuing preliminary orders over secure radio channels to his chief of staff. The Third Army commander had spent months preparing contingency plans for rapid redeployment, understanding that modern warfare demanded flexibility that traditional military doctrine had never contemplated. German intelligence intercepted fragments of these communications, but headquarters dismissed them as elaborate disinformation because turning an army of 300,000 men in 48 hours seemed tactically impossible. No military force in European history had ever demonstrated such operational flexibility under winter conditions that traditionally favored static defensive positions. Within hours of the Verdun Conference, American staff officers were coordinating the movement of 133,000 trucks, 62,000 jeeps, and 6,000 tanks across a front that stretched from Metz to the Luxembourg border. Radio operators worked around the clock to coordinate 12 major routes simultaneously, while engineers prepared roads for heavy traffic that would continue regardless of weather conditions. Fuel convoys began moving immediately, carrying 800,000 gallons daily to support forces that would advance regardless of German defensive preparations. Signal Corps teams laid telephone cables through snow and ice, creating communications networks that would function even if radio frequencies were jammed by enemy action. American quartermasters calculated ammunition requirements and began moving 5,000 tons of supplies to forward positions that had been selected weeks earlier. The scale of logistical preparation became apparent as American supply trains operated with clockwork precision that German observers could not comprehend. Mechanics worked in temperatures below freezing to maintain equipment that Nazi propaganda claimed could not function in winter conditions. Yet American vehicles continued operating when German machines had frozen solid. Medical Corps established field hospitals along projected routes of advance, demonstrating confidence in offensive success that contradicted German assumptions about American defensive mentality. Intelligence officers distributed maps and tactical information to battalion commanders who would lead attacks within days, showing preparation depth that indicated months of contingency planning rather than desperate improvisation that German command expected from surprised enemies. December 22nd marked the beginning of what military historians would later call the greatest tactical maneuver of the Second World War, as Patton's Third Army executed a 90-degree pivot that violated every traditional concept of Army-level operations. Within 48 hours, 300,000 American soldiers, with their complete equipment complement, moved from eastward offensive positions to northward attack formations, covering 150 kilometers across snow-covered terrain that German meteorologists had predicted would halt all major military movements. Tank tracks carved deep furrows through frozen ground as Sherman battalions advanced in columns that stretched beyond the horizon, their engines roaring continuously through winter silence that had been broken only by artillery fire. Radio communications coordinated movements across a front wider than some entire countries, with divisional commanders receiving updated orders every hour as situations developed. American soldiers marched through blizzards that had stopped German advances, their equipment functioning flawlessly despite temperatures that reached 20 degrees below zero. Combat engineers cleared roads and built bridges, while infantry battalions advanced on foot when vehicles could not navigate terrain that challenged even tracked vehicles. Artillery units displaced their guns multiple times daily, maintaining fire support for advancing forces that never paused for weather conditions that German doctrine considered prohibitive for offensive operations. Supply convoys moved continuously day and night, delivering ammunition and fuel to forward positions that changed location faster than German intelligence could track their movements. The sight of endless American columns moving through snow that had halted German offensives revealed fundamental differences between armies that adapted to conditions versus those that were defeated by them. German observation posts reported vehicle movements on a scale they could not quantify because their own logistical system had collapsed under winter pressures that Americans seemed to ignore completely. Wehrmacht radio operators intercepted communications, indicating coordination between air and ground forces that continued operating despite weather conditions that had grounded German aircraft for days. Luftwaffe pilots, when they could fly, observed American convoys that stretched for kilometers in every direction, moving with discipline and purpose that contradicted Nazi propaganda about chaotic American military organization. German artillery spotters counted American tanks and vehicles until they lost track of numbers that exceeded their previous estimates of total American strength in the European theater. The mathematical precision of American movements impressed even veteran German officers who had witnessed Soviet mass attacks on the Eastern Front. Panzer commanders who had expected to advance against demoralized American defenders instead found themselves facing coordinated counterattacks that grew stronger each day rather than weaker as battles continued. German tankers discovered that American Sherman crews had been trained to standards that matched or exceeded Wehrmacht proficiency levels, using tactics that combined individual initiative with systematic coordination that maximized their equipment's effectiveness. American tank destroyers appeared in positions that German reconnaissance had reported empty hours earlier, demonstrating mobility that allowed defensive forces to concentrate rapidly at threatened points. Infantry battalions that German intelligence had written off as combat ineffective fought with determination and skill that forced German commanders to revise their fundamental assumptions about American fighting capability under adverse conditions. December 24th brought the first clear indication that German offensive momentum had not merely stalled, but reversed into something unprecedented in Wehrmacht experience. American forces that had been retreating in apparent disorder 3 days earlier were now advancing against German positions with coordination and firepower that exceeded anything Manteuffel had encountered during his Eastern Front service. Radio intercepts revealed American commanders discussing tactical objectives with confidence that suggested certain victory rather than desperate defense, while German communications increasingly reflected confusion about enemy capabilities that contradicted all intelligence estimates. The psychological impact on German soldiers was immediate and devastating, as troops who had been promised easy victory against demoralized Americans found themselves facing an enemy that grew stronger under pressure rather than weaker, as Nazi doctrine predicted. 4th Armored Division spearheads began their final drive toward Bastogne with tank columns that advanced despite German defensive fire that should have stopped any reasonable military force. Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams led Sherman battalions through German positions at Assenoy with tactical skill that German panzer commanders recognized as professional excellence rather than amateur luck that propaganda had taught them to expect from American forces. American artillery support, coordinated with advancing armor, demonstrated fire control techniques that Wehrmacht officers had considered uniquely German capabilities. Yet Americans executed these complex maneuvers while maintaining advanced speeds that German forces could not match. Combat engineers bridged obstacles and cleared mines under enemy fire with efficiency that enabled continuous forward movement, regardless of German defensive preparations. German defenders discovered that American infantry attacked with small unit tactics that combined individual initiative with systematic coordination in ways that maximize firepower while minimizing casualties. American squad leaders demonstrated tactical knowledge that German training manuals had insisted could only be developed through years of professional military education. Yet these citizen soldiers employed advanced techniques while maintaining morale that actually improved under combat stress. Wehrmacht veterans who had survived years of Eastern Front combat found themselves outfought by American forces that seemed to learn and adapt faster than German units could adjust their defensive tactics. The realization that American military effectiveness exceeded German capabilities spread through German ranks like a psychological infection that undermined confidence in ultimate victory. Artillery observers reported American fire control that achieved accuracy levels German gunners could not match, despite superior training and longer experience with their weapons systems. American forward observers called in fire missions with mathematical precision that placed shells exactly where tactical situations required them, demonstrating coordination between observers and gun crews that German doctrine considered theoretically impossible given American inexperience with European warfare conditions. Counter-battery fire eliminated German artillery positions with efficiency that suggested American forces possessed intelligence capabilities far beyond what Wehrmacht security measures should have allowed. The systematic destruction of German fire support left infantry exposed to American advances that continued regardless of weather conditions or terrain obstacles that should have provided natural defensive advantages. December 25th brought the moment when American tactical superiority became undeniably apparent to every German soldier in the Ardennes salient, as coordinated attacks shattered defensive positions that Wehrmacht engineers had considered impregnable given available time and resources for preparation. SS Oberfuhrer Joachim Peiper, whose Kampfgruppe had spearheaded the German advance, found his forces surrounded and running out of fuel, while American forces that had supposedly been surprised and scattered now attacked from multiple directions simultaneously. The irony was devastating. Elite German formations that had conquered most of Europe in previous campaigns were being systematically destroyed by American forces that German propaganda had dismissed as militarily incompetent. Radio communications revealed American coordination between ground and air forces that continued operating effectively despite weather conditions that had grounded German aircraft for consecutive days. American P-47 Thunderbolts appeared over German positions whenever weather permitted flight operations, delivering close air support with accuracy that eliminated German strongpoints faster than infantry could assault them directly. German soldiers who had been promised air superiority by Luftwaffe commanders instead witnessed American fighter bombers that operated with impunity over battlefields where German aircraft appeared only occasionally and briefly before being driven off by American fighters that seemed to control European skies completely. The psychological impact was enormous, as German troops realized their leaders had lied about American military capabilities in ways that made German victory impossible, regardless of individual courage or tactical skill. Veterans of successful campaigns in Poland, France, and Russia found themselves helpless against American military systems that functioned with machine-like efficiency. American tank crews demonstrated gunnery skills that exceeded German standards despite shorter training periods and less combat experience than Wehrmacht propaganda had claimed was necessary for effective armored operations. Sherman tanks that German intelligence had dismissed as inferior to German armor proved capable of destroying German vehicles through superior tactics and coordination rather than technological superiority alone. American tank destroyers appeared in positions that German reconnaissance had not detected, suggesting American forces possessed mobility and stealth capabilities that German tactical doctrine had not anticipated from heavy mechanized units. The systematic destruction of German armored formations proceeded with mathematical precision that indicated American forces operated according to principles that German military education had not prepared Wehrmacht officers to counter effectively. Infantry combat revealed American small unit leadership that enabled rapid adaptation to changing tactical situations in ways that German doctrine considered impossible without extensive professional military education. American sergeants and lieutenants made tactical decisions with speed and accuracy that German officers recognized as superior to their own capabilities, despite American officers having less formal training and combat experience. Enlisted American soldiers fought with individual initiative while maintaining unit coordination that German military theorists had argued could only be achieved through rigid discipline and lengthy training programs that democratic societies supposedly could not provide. The combination of individual excellence with systematic coordination created American tactical effectiveness that exceeded German capabilities at every organizational level, from squad to division. December 26 at 4:50 in the afternoon withheld the restoration of radio contact between 4th Armored Division and the surrounded Bastogne garrison, marking the moment when German strategic objectives became permanently impossible to achieve. Lieutenant Colonel Abrams called over the radio, replied Brigadier General Anthony McAuliffe, whose response to German surrender demands had become legendary among American forces for its defiant simplicity. The German dream of splitting Allied forces and reaching Antwerp crumbled in that radio transmission, as American tactical flexibility had converted defensive crisis into offensive victory within 1 week of the initial German attack. Operation Watch on Rhine, which had carried Reich leadership's final hopes for negotiated peace with Western allies, became instead a graveyard where Germany's last mobile reserves were systematically destroyed. SS Oberfuhrer Joseph Dietrich wrote in his personal diary that evening, "This observation captured the essential difference between German and American military approaches, as German forces relied on individual heroism and tactical excellence, while Americans had created military systems that functioned regardless of individual capabilities or morale fluctuations." Young German soldiers, many experiencing their first major combat, discovered that American defensive positions were stronger and more sophisticated than German offensive capabilities could overcome, even when surprise had been achieved. The psychological impact devastated German morale, as soldiers who had been promised easy victory against demoralized Americans found themselves facing systematic destruction by enemies who seemed to improve their performance under pressure. German casualties mounted rapidly as American counterattacks proceeded with coordination that impressed even veteran Wehrmacht officers who had survived years of combat against Soviet forces on the Eastern Front. Medical reports indicated German losses were exceeding American casualties by ratios that made continued offensive operations impossible, regardless of strategic importance or political necessity. German commanders found themselves unable to coordinate effective defensive actions because American attacks came from multiple directions simultaneously while maintaining fire. Support that German artillery could no longer provide due to counter-battery fire that eliminated German guns faster than they could be replaced or repositioned. The mathematical precision of American offensive operations suggested planning capabilities that German staff work could not match despite superior formal military education among German officers. American logistics continued functioning flawlessly while German supply lines collapsed under pressure from air attacks and ground interdiction that prevented fuel and ammunition from reaching forward positions where German forces faced destruction or surrender as their only remaining options. German soldiers reported witnessing American field kitchens serving hot meals in sub-zero temperatures, while German troops survived on frozen rations when any food was available at all. American mechanics repaired damaged Sherman tanks within hours, while German Tiger tanks remained immobilized for lack of spare parts that could not be delivered, through supply routes that American air power had made impassable. The contrast in logistical capabilities revealed fundamental differences between military systems that German doctrine had not prepared Wehrmacht leadership to understand or counter effectively. By January 1, 1945, German losses in the Ardennes had reached catastrophic proportions that made continued resistance meaningless, regardless of political orders from Reich leadership or personal courage of individual German soldiers. Final casualty reports documented 120,000 German casualties, 600 tanks and self-propelled guns destroyed or abandoned, 1,600 aircraft lost to American air superiority that had become absolute over Western European battlefields. These numbers represented Germany's last mobile reserves, accumulated through months of desperate reorganization and training programs that had stripped other fronts of experienced personnel and equipment. American forces had not merely repelled German attacks, but had systematically destroyed German military capability in ways that made future offensive operations impossible, regardless of strategic necessity or political desperation. Patton's counteroffensive had become a textbook demonstration of modern maneuver warfare, where decision speed and logistical flexibility mattered more than traditional military virtues of courage and tactical skill that German doctrine emphasized above systematic preparation. American forces proved they could absorb initial tactical defeats, adapt their operations, and return with overwhelming effectiveness that destroyed enemy forces more completely than German victories had ever achieved against major opponents. German military doctrine based on blitzkrieg principles that had conquered most of Europe proved helpless against American ability to adapt instantly to changing battlefield conditions, while maintaining logistical support that enabled continuous offensive operations regardless of weather or terrain obstacles that traditionally favored defensive forces. Wehrmacht leadership discovered that lightning war tactics meant nothing when facing enemies who could move with thunder itself, as American mechanized formations achieved operational speeds that exceeded German capabilities, while maintaining coordination that German staff procedures could not match. Democratic armies, properly equipped and systematically trained, had outfought totalitarian forces that relied on ideological motivation rather than professional competence and industrial support that could sustain prolonged combat operations. American victory demonstrated that technical excellence combined with systematic preparation could overcome traditional military virtues when democratic societies mobilize their complete industrial and human resources for military purposes that totalitarian regimes could not match through political control or individual heroism alone. German prisoners taken during the failed offensive reported profound shock at American abundance and operational efficiency that contradicted everything Nazi propaganda had taught them about democratic military capabilities. Former Wehrmacht soldiers described American field hospitals that treated German wounded with same medical care provided to American casualties, contradicting Nazi teaching about Allied brutality toward German prisoners. German POWs witnessed American supply operations that delivered hot food and medical supplies to forward positions under combat conditions that would have made German logistics impossible, demonstrating systematic capabilities that totalitarian organization had failed to achieve, despite political control over entire populations and industrial resources of conquered Europe. We prepared for lightning war, and they brought hurricane warfare. General Major Hasso von Manteuffel wrote in his post-war memoirs, capturing the essential difference between German tactical excellence and American systematic superiority that had determined the Ardennes battle's outcome. German forces had attacked according to military doctrine that emphasized speed and tactical surprise, but Americans had responded with operational capabilities that exceeded German comprehension of modern warfare possibilities. The Ardennes offensive revealed that Wehrmacht leadership still thought in Great War categories, where armies slowly ground each other down through attrition, while Americans had developed future warfare concepts, where entire armies could change operational directions faster than enemies could react to changing tactical situations. Snow in the Ardennes melted during spring 1945, washing away bloodstains from Germany's last offensive operation in Western Europe. But the psychological impact on German military thinking proved permanent and decisive. German tactical excellence, which had conquered most of Europe through superior training and aggressive leadership, crumbled against American systematic excellence that coordinated hundreds of thousands of soldiers and thousands of machines with mathematical precision that democratic societies had proven capable of achieving when properly motivated and organized. The battle demonstrated conclusively that individual courage and tactical innovation could not overcome industrial capacity when that capacity was properly organized and commanded by leaders who understood modern warfare's systematic requirements, rather than relying on traditional military virtues alone. American victory in the Ardennes was not merely military triumph, but decorating that democratic societies could fight more effectively than totalitarian regimes when survival was threatened and democratic values were properly channeled into military effectiveness through systematic preparation and industrial support. German officers who had dismissed American fighting capability based on Nazi propaganda about democratic weakness now faced armies that combined overwhelming material superiority with tactical innovation and operational flexibility that exceeded German military capabilities at every organizational level. The Reich's final gamble had not only failed catastrophically, but had accelerated German collapse by destroying reserves that might have delayed inevitable defeat for additional months. The sound of Patton's tanks breaking through snow and German defensive positions echoed across Europe as the death knell of German hopes for separate peace with Western allies that might have enabled continued resistance against Soviet forces advancing from the east. German military leadership realized too late that underestimating American military capability had been fundamental strategic error that made German defeat inevitable, regardless of tactical skill or individual heroism. The winter that was supposed to favor German defensive operations instead became the season of American triumph, as Sherman tanks and P-47 Thunderbolts operated effectively in conditions that grounded German aircraft and immobilized German armor. Democracy had found its sword, and that sword cut through Nazi military pretensions like tempered steel slicing through snow, leaving German ambitions buried beneath Ardennes winter that would never end for the Third Reich.